Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I will explain about Seraphim. What are the Seraphim? In Christian, Islamic, and Jewish writings, the Seraphim are celestial beings portrayed as having 2 or 3 pairs of wings and serving as guardians of God's throne. The prophet Isaiah tells us that the Seraphim are 6-winged fiery angels who surround God as he sits upon his exalted throne and continually worship God. Isaiah 6. The Seraphim also minister to the Lord and serve as his agents of purification, as demonstrated by their cleansing of Isaiah's sins before he began his prophetic ministry. Isaiah's vision of the Lord. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the Seraphim. Each had 6 wings, with 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, the whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me! For I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the Seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips, your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. Isaiah 6:1-7. Seraphim angels in the Bible. 4 things to know. 1. The word seraphim in the Bible appears only in Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah 6 is the only passage in the Bible that specifically mentions the word seraphim, meaning the fiery ones. In that biblical chapter, Isaiah describes his intense vision of God's heavenly court. Namely, the prophet saw God seated on an exalted throne surrounded by flying angels called the seraphim. Isaiah 6:1-2. The word seraphim is the plural form of the Hebrew root word seraph, which means to burn. The implication here is that these attendant angels burn with love for God. The seraphim seem to bear a resemblance to humans, as Isaiah describes them as having faces, feet, hands, and voices. Isaiah 6:2-7. 2. The seraphim are fiery angels who revere God and proclaim his supreme glory. The seraphim repeatedly proclaim God's supreme holiness and glory in Isaiah's vision. Isaiah 6:3. The seraphim do not address God directly but call out to each other in God's presence, and they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty, the whole earth is full of his glory. Isaiah 6:3. To be holy means being set apart and considered sacred. This thrice invocation of the word holy to describe God's sacred nature appears only 2 times in the Bible, and angels speak both times to someone transported in a vision to the throne of God. The other passage containing this thrice invocation of God's holiness is found in Revelation 4:8, which also refers to 6-winged angels surrounding God's heavenly throne and constantly declaring God's glory. 3. The Trisagion, the thrice invocation of holy and the seraphim's worship of God is significant. The fact that the seraphim in Isaiah's vision use a 3-fold repetition of God's holiness, called the Trisagion, is significant. In ancient Judaism, the number 3 signified completeness and stability, here connoting God's wholeness as the beginning, the middle, and the end. Announcing God's holiness 3 times also connotes God's eternal nature, which is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Hebrews 13:8. God's divine perfection is seen in the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and God's complete and supreme holiness is unmatched by anything or anyone else. Isaiah goes on to describe the effect of the seraphim's proclamation, telling us that at the sound of the angels' voices asserting God's magnificence, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Isaiah 6:4. In biblical times, earthquakes and smoke were signs of God's divine presence. Exodus 19:18, Psalm 104:32. 4. The seraphim also minister to God and serve as his agents of purification. When Isaiah noticed that the heavenly seraphim covered themselves before God to acknowledge their unworthiness before the Lord, the prophet became aware of his own mortal sinfulness and feared for his life. At that point, one of the seraphim picked up a burning coal with tongs from the altar, brought the live coal to Isaiah, and touched it to Isaiah's lips. Isaiah 6:6-7. This act purified Isaiah's sins by fire, as the seraph assured Isaiah that now his guilt is taken away and his sin atoned for. Isaiah 6:7. With his sins cleansed, Isaiah could now speak directly to God. When God called out for a prophet, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" The purified Isaiah was able to accept this prophetic commission to the people of Israel by responding, "Here am I, send me." Isaiah 6:8. Seraphim wings, their meaning and significance. Each seraph is described as having 6 wings, 2 wings used to cover their face, 2 used to cover their feet, and the remaining 2 used to fly. 2 wings to cover their faces. One reason the seraphim may use 4 of their 6 wings to cover themselves is to express their humility before God. In particular, these burning angels may use a pair of wings to cover their faces to show God reverence, considering themselves unworthy to look upon the face of God, and also in obedience to the Lord's admonition that no one may see his face and live. Exodus 33:20. 2 wings to cover their feet. The fact that the seraphim also use a second pair of wings to cover their feet may further display reverence for God, and that the angels may be refusing to reveal any unclean aspects of their being before the Lord. 2 wings to fly. The seraphim use their remaining 2 wings to fly and wait upon God. This detail Isaiah gives us of the seraphim using the majority of their 6 wings to venerate God and the remaining 2 wings to serve God may signify that we, as the faithful, serve God best when we venerate Him, our top priority. It is said that the seraphim flew about the throne on which God was seated, singing His praises as they called special attention to God's glory and majesty. These beings apparently also served as agents of purification. An ancient Judean seal from the 8th century BCE depicts them as flying asps, yet having human characteristics, as encountered by Isaiah in his commissioning as a prophet. Seraphim are known to defy the laws of the universe when commanded, such as when one placed a hot coal against Isaiah's lips with the words, "See, this has touched your lips, your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for." It did not burn him, but instead healed. Similar to the other types of holy angels, the seraphim are perfectly obedient to God. Similar to the cherubim, the seraphim are particularly focused on worshiping God.